Hi, I'm Michelle with the Garrett Public Library, and I will be doing your Railroader reading tonight. I'm reading from the book Chicken Soup for the Soul, Think Positive and Live Happy. I'm just going to do a couple of short stories today. The first story is called A Stone's Throw. We had hiked just over a mile and a half. Our golden retriever was dragging a little bit and needed a water break. My wife grabbed her day pack and found the water bottle. She poured some water into a beat-up bowl, and the dog lapped it up quickly. We settled onto an old tree trunk and rested our middle-aged legs for a few minutes. The dog was tired but happy. She loves to hike with us, and today was no exception. My wife was content as well. She enjoys every opportunity to exercise, and hiking in the fall tops her list of favorite things to do. I had to be coaxed into the hike. My wife reminded me of how we hiked when we first dated and said, "It can be like that." I moaned and I groaned about wanting to watch football, but as the sun glistened atop the colorful leaves on this Indian summer day, I was swayed to join her. I also felt a twinge of guilt for not doing more of the things we did when we were first dating. As our hike progressed, I had to admit that the fresh fall air and unexpected warmth helped make our time in the woods rather enjoyable. I glanced over at some kids playing near a stream. Two boys and their older sister chased each other around, and one of them exclaimed that he had found some shells. This was a stream in southeastern Ohio, not the ocean. So both my wife and I looked at each other as if to say, "That kid has a vivid imagination." Within a minute, his sister was also holding up a shell. Sure enough, some shells had made their way to the edge of a stream in the middle of the woods in Ohio. My wife loves shells almost as much as she loves hiking, so she jumped up and walked over to where the kids were playing. She grabbed a shell and held it up like a prize. I grabbed the dog's leash and we walked over to join her. The dog jumped up and down and seemed to be telling my wife that the shell looked great. They both examined the shell closely as if they had a gold nugget. My wife smiled as she picked up more shells. I began looking around and saw a perfectly flat stone on the ground. In an instant, I recalled skipping stones near the lake where my grandfather took me fishing as a kid. I love skipping stones. Watching a flat stone skip across the water 7 or 8 times was like watching some sort of a magic trick. I told my wife she could keep her shells. I had found a skipping stone. She gave me a puzzled look and then asked, "What's a skipping stone?" I walked over and showed her the flat, thin rock. I said, "Watch this." I flung the stone in a perfect motion so that it would hit the water just right and then skip along the top several times. She looked on in amazement and asked how I did that. To my surprise, my wife had never skipped stones. I gave her a quick lesson, and then she tried it. After just a few attempts, she was able to skip a stone like a pro. As she became more and more successful at skipping stones, her smile got bigger and bigger. The dog looked on and was ready to chase each and every rock. I held her tightly so that she did not take a plunge into the muddy stream. A wet, dirty dog would ruin my wife's joy. For a few minutes, my wife and I took turns holding the dog and skipping stones. We had so much fun that we didn't notice the sun fading behind the trees. It was time to head back. We stood near the stream as we prepared to make the trek back to the car. For a couple of perfect minutes, I stood behind my wife and wrapped my arms around her waist. I could tell she was content and proud of her new skill. I was simply glad that I was there to share in it. As a boy, I thought skipping a stone was magical. Now, as a middle-aged man sharing a moment with the woman I have loved for over 20 years, it was beyond magical. That's the beauty of life. The simple and unexpected moments are almost always the best ones. Like a moment when you go hiking on a fall day and share something new with your spouse. Her joy of learning how to skip stones for the first time made me feel great, and it made me love her even more. We held hands as we hiked back, just like we did when we first dated. The dog led the way, wagging her tail with each step. The next time my wife wants to go hiking in the fall, I definitely won't want to skip it. And that was a story submitted by David Warren. Okay, the next story I'm going to read is When Have To Becomes Get To. There's a quote, "Having a baby is a life changer. It gives you a whole other perspective on why you wake up every day." And that was a quote from Taylor Hanson. And the story begins, "I was utterly exhausted taking care of my first baby. The never-ending cycle of feeding, burping, changing, cuddling, and settling the baby down to sleep was relentless. While my baby napped, I might find time for a quick shower or a moment to unload the dishwasher. Perhaps I would have felt sorry for myself, except that I knew how lucky I was to be working this hard. When he was just a few days old, my son, who had been born healthy, suddenly developed a severe illness that sent him to the neonatal intensive care unit. One minute, the nurses in the maternity ward were helping me get him ready to go home. The next minute, he had a team of doctors trying to save him. Within a few hours, the crisis passed, but he remained in the hospital for observation for close to a week. We never knew why he got sick or why he got better. That frightening experience was a reminder not to take anything for granted. It allowed me to remain positive even when motherhood was full of drudgery. So, when my baby's hungry cries woke me at 2 a.m., I reminded myself I didn't have to drag myself out of bed to nurse him. Instead, I was blessed with the opportunity to do so. When he suddenly spit up all over me, ruining my favorite blouse, I knew I was fortunate that this unexpectedly messy burp was my only concern. And when I had to change all his clothes only moments after getting him dressed, I recognized how lucky I was to have a healthy baby who could make a diaper overflow. As my son grew older and his younger brother joined our family, I continued to remind myself that I didn't have to do some of the more boring or disagreeable parental tasks, but that I got to as the mother of 2 healthy, smart, and happy boys. Picking lice and nits out of my younger son's hair, a yucky job for sure, but also the result of having a vigorous young athlete who shared a batting helmet with other boys on the baseball team. Getting out of the shower to find that my toddler had completely emptied all the books from the bookcase and removed dozens of CDs and DVDs from their plastic cases? Okay, picking up everything and putting it away was going to take some time, but I understood that the need to explore and touch things was the delightful sign of an energetic child with loads of curiosity. Being jostled by the crowds at the mall as I shopped for a present for yet another birthday party. A small price to pay for having kids who thoroughly enjoyed strong bonds with their classmates and teammates. Maintaining this positive attitude when my boys were little was made easier by the fact that I was often richly rewarded for my mothering efforts. A trip to the playground would result in fun and laughter. If I made a special dessert, I knew I could count on a kiss of thanks. When I read a favorite storybook at bedtime, I knew there would be an extra hearty goodnight hug. But when the sullenness of the teenage years arrived, everything I did was wrong. It became harder to convince myself that doing another load of laundry was anything other than a thankless chore when it led to complaints that I was folding pants the wrong way. As dinner time became a battleground, I began to resent the effort I put into cooking meals that were never really enjoyed by anyone at the table. I'll have to confess that there were moments when my bickering boys hardly felt like blessings to me. And then I remembered that not everyone gets to do these things for their kids. My husband's mother, for example, was losing her fight with cancer when he was just a teenager. I'm sure she was heartbroken at the thought that she would no longer be able to take care of her son, make sure he was fed nutritious meals, keep his bureau drawers stocked with clean socks, and see him grow into an adult. Remembering her struggle helps me appreciate how lucky I am that I am here, I am healthy, and can still help the children that I love so much. By reframing those everyday chores as things I get to do, I remember that I am living the life I chose, and it's a wonderful life at that. And that was from Vittorio Francese. And the last story I'm going to do is called Operation Sunshine. There's a quote at the beginning, "Your abundance is not measured by what you have, it is created by what you share." And that's from Heidi Catherine Culbertson. I was a single mother of 2 preteens, working 3 part-time jobs, so I would have the flexibility to take my mother to the dialysis clinic for treatments 3 times a week. One day, as we sat in the waiting room at the clinic, my mother leaned closer to me and said, "You know, honey, barring getting a kidney transplant, every single person in this room is terminal." Immediately, I understood what she was saying. The average lifespan for a dialysis patient is only about 5 to 10 years, although some people can take treatments for decades. Once treatment is initiated, however, it is extremely unlikely that a person's kidney function will ever improve to the point at which he or she will be able to discontinue the treatments and live. Glancing around the room, I thought about the people who were there. There was Aunt Tootsie, a retired school teacher who loved to talk to everyone, and Colonel Hooper, a retired military hero. There was Mr. Coble, a retired police detective from Detroit. When he found out that my late father had been a police officer, he loved to sit beside me and tell me about some of his more interesting cases. There was also Mr. Miller, a Mennonite man, who came from a small community an hour and 15 minutes away from the clinic for his treatments. The dialysis patients were not all old people, however. There was Jimmy, a 30-ish man who was not a viable candidate for a transplant because his body produced too many antibodies. Talking to him was an even younger man, a relatively new patient whose name I hadn't learned yet, who had already undergone a heart and double lung transplant and was now waiting for a new kidney. Each one of these people came into the clinic and endured a physically demanding 3 to 4.5 hour dialysis treatment. My mother was gently pointing out to me that at least I still had my entire life ahead of me, unlike most of these wonderful people whom we had come to know. I mulled over her words during her entire 4-hour treatment. I kept thinking that I needed to do something to let these patients know that someone realized their struggles and cared about what happened to them. Later, I went to the dollar store and a craft store looking for some inspiration. It was September, so I bought some miniature apples, pumpkins, and leaves for a fall theme. When I arrived home, I put them into small individual Ziploc bags. The next time I took Mom to dialysis, I waited until after she had gone back for her treatment. Then I snuck back to my car and retrieved the bags of treats from where I had hidden them on the back seat. I rang the door buzzer, and when a nurse came to the door, I handed her the bags and asked her to pass them out among the patients. "What's this?" she asked with a surprised smile. "I'm calling it Operation Sunshine," I said, smiling in return. In October, I made non-edible treat bags for Halloween. In November, there was something for Thanksgiving. For Christmas, I gave all the patients on Mom's shift a Christmas ornament chosen specifically for them. If a patient's port was blocked, requiring him or her to go to Nashville for surgery and postoperative dialysis, I sent a card to them. If a patient passed away, the family received a card or an angel Christmas ornament. These were always sent from Operation Sunshine. I never signed my real name. It was several months before my mother realized who was behind Operation Sunshine. She had recognized my handwriting on a card given to someone else and asked point blank if it was me. I admitted that it was, but I asked her to keep my secret, as the nurses who came to the door to take my gifts back to the patients were the only ones who knew my identity. Sometime after the first of the year, one of the nurses pulled me aside and said that some of the patients on other shifts had heard about Operation Sunshine. They wanted to know why only one shift was getting these treats. So I expanded my project to include the later shift on Mom's Monday, Wednesday, Friday rotation, and both shifts on the alternating days. I bought kids' paper valentines, gold coins for St. Patrick's Day, flag-themed items for the 4th of July, and something for all the major holidays. If a month didn't have a holiday, such as August, I bought items to represent the season. The challenge became being able to buy so many treats without spending a lot of money that I did not have. But by buying when items were on clearance one year for use on the next year's Operation Sunshine, I was able to keep things affordable. 5 years after I began this project, my mother passed away suddenly. It was the first weekend in May. The very next week, I showed up at the dialysis clinic with artificial roses for Mother's Day Operation Sunshine. The nurse who greeted me at the door had tears in her eyes. "You didn't have to, Jan. No one expected you to do it this month," she said as she took the large bag from me. "This was the most important one," I said determinedly. "Otherwise, I might not be able to come back in here." My mother has been gone 12 years, but I still continue to do Operation Sunshine at the same dialysis clinic. Due to the HIPAA privacy rule, I can no longer send cards to patients in the hospital, and it is impossible to find out when a patient dies, so I can send a sympathy card. In fact, I don't know if anyone who was a patient while my mother was here is still living, but I continue to try to do what I can to brighten these patients' days because they showed me what courage is and the importance of making a difference in people's lives. That was from Jan Hopkins Campbell. And that was my last story. I hope you enjoyed those, and we will see you next month.